There was a man who walked into the nightmare wearing a Nazi pin on his lapel, shaking hands with the people who were orchestrating genocide, smiling at officers who had just come from the camps, and using their own greed, their own corruption, their own blind arrogance against them to pull human beings out of the machinery of death one name at a time. And history remembers him as a hero. But the truth is more complicated than that, because Oskar Schindler wasn't a saint who woke up one day with a calling. He was a gambler, a womanizer, a war profiteer who saw an opportunity to get rich off Jewish labor, and somewhere between the money and the madness, something cracked open inside him, and he realized that the people he was using had names, had families, had eyes that looked at him like he was their last chance, and he couldn't unsee it, couldn't go back to pretending they were just numbers on a production sheet, and so he made a choice that would cost him everything he had accumulated, everything he had schemed for, because saving them became more important than saving himself. The film made him noble from the beginning, gave him an arc of redemption that felt cinematic and clean, but the real Schindler started in the darkness, started complicit, started as someone who would have let it all happen if the horror hadn't gotten so close that he could smell the smoke from the crematoriums and hear the screams that no amount of money could drown out. And that's the truth that makes his transformation more powerful, more human, more terrifying, because it means he was like most people, capable of looking away until looking away became impossible. And then when it mattered most, he chose to see. You've been there, maybe not in a genocide, maybe not with lives literally in your hands, but you've been in the position where doing the right thing would cost you something, where speaking up would mean losing your comfort, your safety, your status, and you stayed quiet because the cost felt too high, because you convinced yourself that one person can't make a difference, that the system is too big, that someone else would step up, that it wasn't your responsibility. And you lived with that silence, with that small betrayal of your own conscience, and maybe you still do. You've watched injustice happen and done nothing because doing something felt impossible, felt dangerous, felt like it would require you to sacrifice too much of yourself. And so you protected what was yours, and told yourself it was pragmatic, it was realistic, it was just how the world works. And maybe that's true. Maybe survival does require compromise. But there's a line, there's always a line, and you won't know where that line is until you're standing on it. Until you have to choose between your comfort and someone else's life. And in that moment, you'll find out who you really are. Not who you think you are, not who you tell yourself you'd be in a crisis, but who you actually become when the cost of courage is more than words, when it's everything. Here's what you need to understand about Schindler's story. He didn't start as a hero. He started as an opportunist who saw cheap labor and a chance to profit from the war. And his factory wasn't built on compassion. It was built on exploitation, on the same machinery that was grinding human beings into dust all across Europe. And for a while he was fine with that. He paid the bribes, he schmoozed the officers, he threw parties while his workers starved because he had separated them in his mind. They were a resource, not people. And that separation is what allows atrocity to function. That ability to categorize human beings as something other, something less, something that doesn't require your empathy or your protection. But something changed. Maybe it was seeing a little girl in a red coat wandering through the liquidation of the ghetto. Maybe it was watching his workers beaten for no reason. Maybe it was just the accumulation of too many moments where the humanity he was trying to ignore kept breaking through, and he couldn't maintain the separation anymore. Couldn't keep pretending that the numbers on his list weren't people who would die if he didn't intervene. And that realization didn't make him comfortable. It ruined him. It destroyed the easy life he had built. Because once you see people as people, once you let yourself feel the weight of their existence, you can't go back to using them. You can only try to save them, even if saving them means losing everything else. The brutal truth is this. Schindler saved over 1,000 lives by bankrupting himself. By spending every penny he had made from the war on bribes, on fake documentation, on convincing Nazi officers that his workers were essential, that they were irreplaceable, that killing them would hurt the war effort. And he did this knowing he would end the war with nothing. Knowing he would be hunted as a Nazi collaborator, knowing that the people he saved might never know the full extent of what he sacrificed, and he did it anyway, not because he was naturally good, but because he had seen too much to stay neutral, because neutrality in the face of genocide is just another word for complicity. And he understood that if he did nothing, if he just kept his head down and his factory running and his profits growing, he would be able to live with the wealth, but he wouldn't be able to live with himself. The film shows him breaking down at the end, wishing he had saved more, looking at his car and his gold pin, and realizing he could have traded them for lives. And that scene is true that guilt is real because no matter how many you save, you're haunted by the ones you couldn't, by the faces you didn't add to the list, by the moments where you chose safety over another human being, and Schindler carried that weight until he died, not as a burden that destroyed him, but as a reminder of what matters, of what actually counts when everything else is stripped away, and all that's left is whether you helped or you hid. So here's what you do with this story. Here's what you carry forward from a man who started in the darkness and chose the light when it cost him everything. You stop waiting for permission to do the right thing. You stop calculating whether the cost is worth it. You stop convincing yourself that one person can't make a difference when Schindler's List proves that one person can be the difference between life and death for 1,000 souls. And maybe you're not in a position to save lives from genocide, but you're in a position to do something, to speak up, to intervene, to use whatever privilege or power or resources you have to stand between injustice and the people it's trying to crush. You don't have to be a saint. You don't have to be fearless. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be someone who sees suffering and decides that looking away isn't an option, that comfort isn't worth the cost of your conscience, that there are things more important than your safety, your status, your stuff. And when you make that choice, when you decide that people matter more than profit, more than convenience, more than your own peace of mind, you won't feel like a hero. You'll feel terrified. You'll feel like you're losing everything. You'll wonder if it's worth it. And the answer is, you won't know if it's worth it until years later, maybe decades later, maybe never. But the people you help will know. They'll carry your name like Schindler's Jews carried his. They'll tell their children and their children's children about the person who saw them as human when the world had decided they were disposable. And that legacy, that quiet reverberation of one choice to act when everyone else was frozen, that's what outlasts the money, the comfort, the safety you thought you couldn't live without. Oskar Schindler died broke, exiled, alcoholic, buried in Jerusalem by the people he saved. Because his own country wanted nothing to do with him, and on his grave they placed stones, each one a testament from a life that continued because of him, from a family that exists because he spent his fortune on bribes instead of keeping it for himself, from children who were born because their grandparents' names were on a list that a flawed, complicated, deeply human man decided was worth more than everything he owned. The film made him a hero, gave him a narrative arc that felt satisfying and complete. But the real Schindler was messier than that. He was broken by what he saw. He was never the same after the war. He tried business after business and failed because he couldn't go back to caring about profit when he had seen what really matters. When he had learned that the only wealth that counts is measured in lives saved, in moments of courage, in choosing humanity over comfort even when the cost is everything. You'll never be in his exact situation. You'll never have to deceive Nazis to save Jews from gas chambers. But you'll have your own list, your own moments where you can choose to add a name or look away, where you can spend your resources on what matters, or hoard them for security that won't mean anything if you've lost your soul in the process. And in those moments, remember that heroes aren't born. They're just ordinary people who see something unbearable and decide that doing nothing is worse than losing everything. And that decision, that terrifying, costly, world-changing decision to act when everyone else is paralyzed, that's available to you too, right now, in whatever situation is asking you to choose between your comfort and someone else's humanity. And the only question is whether you'll add the name to your list or whether you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you had.